I'm going to compare the testimonies of Paula Vennells and Angela van der Bogerd at the Post Office inquiry to show you how a common misunderstanding of what professionalism means may have played a part in the UK Post Office scandal. So let's take a look at Angela van der Bogerd, who appeared at the inquiry on April 25th and 26th. At the time of the scandal, she was a senior manager at Post Office Limited. In her testimony to the inquiry on the morning of the 26th, something quite interesting happened. Jason Beer, chief counsel for the inquiry, had a bit of a dig at her.
It was never to keep the matter hushed up. Any settlement agreement that Post Office ever entered into was done with a non-disclosure agreement.
Why?
Because that was just the way they operated. That was always the way.
But just why? Just take a step back from the answer of an automaton.
He called her a robot. He was getting frustrated that she wouldn't answer the question, why did you make them sign a non-disclosure agreement? It was in relation to the suicide of a sub-postmaster, Martin Griffiths, who committed suicide because of the way the post office had treated him. Van der Bogerd offered the sub-postmaster's family a payment of £140,000 on the condition that they didn't pursue any legal action against the post office and that they signed a non-disclosure agreement preventing them from talking about the post office. Van der Bogerd was answering Beer's questions about all of this in what appeared to be a dispassionate way, without showing any emotion. And that's why I think Beer got impatient with her, because it was just so awful to speak with no apparent feeling about something so awful that had happened. But perhaps he was also frustrated at how guarded and circumspect she was being. Now, let's contrast the performance of Angela van der Bogerd with that of Paula Vennells, who was Post Office CEO at the time of the scandal. Well, she showed emotion, not all the time, but when she did, it came in a bucket load.
And I phoned
Beer didn't seem to respond with much concern when she did this.
I phoned the family and I spoke to the father, who explained to me that there were other issues involved. And I imagine that, I imagine that I was probably...
Ms. Vennells, just rather than trying to talk through your...
So I beg your pardon.
Just pause.
Yes, okay.
Try and compose yourself if you can, and then continue your evidence, please.
And she did this more than once. He didn't say, are you okay? I think he should have. But maybe he thought she was just feeling sorry for herself, or maybe he thought it was just a performance. Actually, it might be useful to think of both Van der Bogerd and Vennells as engaging in performance, not to be cynical about them, even though they've given us good reason to be cynical, but because it helps us think about how they might have been performing what they thought being professional should look like. And if this was the case, they performed this very differently. There's a widespread way of thinking about professionalism and what it means to act professionally, which is not only false and anachronistic, out of date, but actually quite dangerous. This is the notion that to act professionally means to detach yourself from your work so that you can act with neutrality and objectivity. You don't allow your personal values to colour your work. It's also the common belief that this is how scientists should act. I see this all the time when training students to become qualitative research interviewers. They adopt this way of interviewing where they give nothing away. Their face is expressionless. They worry about showing any emotion. They worry if they tell their interviewee their own thoughts. They worry that this is going to bias their results. For the interviewee, it's like they're talking into a vacuum. It's a terrible way of interviewing, but students find it really difficult to move away from it because it's drilled into them through their training in quantitative research that they have to be objective. But it's also drilled into them through this anachronistic idea of what being a professional means. It's that drive for objectivity. And that's what I think we saw in Van der Bogerd's performance at the inquiry. And that's what might explain her emotional, neutral positioning, the way she didn't give much away. But she also didn't give much away about why she'd done what she'd done. It was also in her interests to act that way. It's not just about acting out a professional role. It actually served her interests, not to tell us her personal reasons for why she did what she did, given that she did some bad things and she had the threat of future litigation hanging over her. But what about Vennells? Well, Vennells' performance of her professionalism was very different. She gave an emotion-laden testimony. She talked about her values, what was driving her, and so on. Now, that might have been seen as her being unprofessional. I'm sure people thought that in those moments she looked unprofessional, but actually in those moments she was acting professionally because she was telling us about the personal values behind what she did. And her personal values was all about justice, fairness, and welfare of those around her. Hold on, stick with me. There is a but coming. So this is the but. There's a problem with her doing this. The problem was that all of those values that she expressed in her testimony were in stark contrast with the behaviours that were inscribed in all the emails and internal documents written by her or about her, which were shown to the inquiry. Those documents told a different tale, a tale of a CEO who didn't appear to give two hoots about the welfare of sub-postmasters.
There are at least 150 postmasters who claim they've experienced serious problems with the Horizon system.
Why would you plead guilty?
Because I knew I couldn't defend myself. I would have gone to prison for theft of 36,000, but there was a chance I wouldn't if I pleaded guilty to false accounting.
She expressed irritation with them. She trivialized and dismissed their cries for help, and her concerns for people's welfare seemed to extend little beyond that of appearing to want to protect herself and her executive team. But in those tear-soaked moments during her testimony, however contrived it may have been, we see what professionalism should have looked like. To act professionally means to be value-driven, not value-neutral, driven by your personal values. And it means being transparent about your personal values, not hiding them. And that drive has to be fueled by emotion, by passion. Without passion, there's no drive. You can't be a dispassionate professional. And professionalism is also about acting with integrity, which means those personal values need to be aligned with a strong set of broader moral values that are linked to fairness, equity, and justice, and to promote the public good. Unfortunately for Vennells, her drive seemed to be the profitability of the post office and all about protecting the corporate brand. And she put profit before people, and she covered that up with the pretense of a set of values that spoke of justice and fairness. Objectivity does have a role, but it's in relation to not being driven out of self-interest and for your actions not to be self-serving. And that's particularly important for those working in public institutions like the post office, who should be serving the public. In psychology, we kind of teach our students to be objective in that sense, to work in the interest of the public, not to work out of self-interest. But we load that concept of objectivity up with a whole lot of garbage, all that garbage about not putting their values on display, to keep their cards close to their chest, to avoid disclosing too much about themselves for fear that it will bias how people think about what they do. And that lack of disclosure was the very thing that accelerated the horrific injustices meted out by the post office against sub-postmasters. It's that notion of maintaining objectivity that informed the performance of Van de Bogerd. But it was also there in the performance of Vennells, because she was not showing us her values through that veil of tears. She was hiding them through constructing, through those tears, the pretense that she was motivated by something other than the drive to increase profit and to protect the corporate brand. Well, that's my view, anyway. But there's no surprise in any of this. This is exactly what CEOs of corporations are required to do, to make the corporation profitable, to deliver profit, but also to protect the corporate brand. So she was no different from any other CEO, apart from she pushed it to the point that it became criminal and full-on immoral. And objectivity gets cemented into this notion of professionalism that these people in power push into the public domain, because it serves the interests of immoral actors. It gives them the cloak with which to hide from us the reasons for what they're doing, and it protects them from challenge when their interests conflict with ours. Now, let's finish off by looking at how that first day of questioning of Vennells ended, the day we all saw her crying, because something else happened. And that something laid bare that anachronistic notion of professionalism. Beer had asked his last question for the day.
So those are all my questions for today. It's just gone 4:30.
And just as he was readying to ask the chair, Sir Wyn Williams, if he was happy to close the session, Wyn said, hold on a minute, I've got a question. And it was in relation to a document that was presented earlier in the day. It was a document Vennells had been given by her team in 2015 as an addendum to a briefing pack to help her prepare for her appearance at a forthcoming parliamentary select committee that was looking into the post office scandal. I talk about it in my last video. It was the document that laid out a strategy for Vennells, a key part of which was to only give information to the committee if pushed to do so. And here is what Wyn asked.
If I were to suggest to you that you were being advised to be very precise, very circumspect, and very guarded about what you said, that was the effect of that document. Would you agree?
I would, Sir Wyn. I'm not sure I would have noticed that on the morning of the day.
But you'll see the point in a moment. That was the effect that was trying to be created by those who created that document.
It could have been, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Why?
With hindsight, because possibly...
And if you need time to think about it,
No,
you can tell me in the morning.
No, I don't.
No.
And that kind of says it all. In Post Office Limited, we had a whole array of professionals that used an anachronistic way of thinking about being professional that allowed them to conceal behind the outward appearance of objectivity a whole array of bad intent and bad motivations that drove them to push through on the convictions of sub-postmasters. Post office executives told the world that there was nothing to see here, that they had nothing to hide. Well, now there's nothing to hide because we're all getting to see what they were really up to over all those years. And we get to see behind the veils of objectivity, the veils of professionalism, and also those periodic veils of tears. So that's all from me for now. Thanks for watching. And if you can, subscribe and give me a thumbs up. It helps my channel. Oh, I don't monetize, by the way. This is not done out of self-interest. So I make no money from these videos. Just wanted to be clear about that. Okay, ta-da.